In this video, you're going to learn about the retrograding planets for 2021. If you're a forecasting astrologer, this is for you. We're going to go through each of the planets and look at each of the retrograde cycles that's going to occur for the year 2021. Hi, I'm Alison, an astrologer in Vancouver, Canada. This video is part of a series for forecasting astrologers for the year 2021. If you want to know more about the eclipses of 2021, you can check out this link here. I will also be working on the Ingresses for next year as well. I will also be working on the Ingresses for 2021, and they'll be coming out. So there'll be a suite of 3 or possibly 4 videos relating to forecasting for astrologers for 2021. I'm also creating my 2021 astrology guide, which comes out every year. It's a PDF download, and as soon as that's ready, I'll have a video here and you can link to it down below. So if you're watching this a little later on in the year, everything should be available. But we live in hope. So why are we looking at the retrogrades for 2021? Because as planets are moving through and transiting, they're either contacting your chart or they're not, or they're contacting your client's charts or they're not. And if they're not, you can move on. But if you have, say, a conjunction from Pluto to your sun, you want to know about this because this is going to be the main theme for the whole of the year. It will be the total, it will dominate whatever else is going on. So as an astrologer, you need to know what these dates are and what these positions are within the zodiac for the actual retrogrades. Now, when a planet is going to retrograde, it will retrograde across a certain section of the zodiac, say from 10 Gemini to 20 Gemini, and that will be its retrograde period. And if you have planets or points in your natal chart within a retrograde period, you will get a 3-hit conjunction from that planet. And in some cases there will be a 5-hit, but you will definitely get a 3-hit. And what this means is that the energy of that transiting planet is closely interacting with your chart. So any planet that is actually making a 3-hit transit to your chart for 2021 will be energizing you in the nature of that planet. So of course you do need to understand the meanings of the planets to start with as they are retrograding and what the actual presence of retrogradation means. I do have more videos about retrograde cycles in general up here as well, and you can watch that if you're still a little unsure. So the idea is that as the transiting planet comes along, its energy will stimulate your chart. Say it's going to make a conjunction to your sun, it's going to stimulate you, your identity, who you are, and ultimately make changes to you. As the cycle develops, there are different parts to a retrograde cycle. You can discover more about those as well in this video. And the idea is that you want to understand how will this retrograde planet impact your chart or your client's chart for your forecast for 2021. This is the whole point about forecasting with transits, that when a planet is retrograde, it really will make a connection with that person. So we're just going to go through now each of the retrograde cycles, and you can see the dates and positions within the zodiac, and then you can check whether your clients or your family's charts have planets or points, and by that I mean ascendant, midheaven, the nodes and so on, at these positions where something is going to be retrograding. I'm also talking to you about the days at the station, and that means how long will the planet linger on one particular point in the zodiac, almost, as we like to say, burning a hole in the zodiac. If you have planets there, they will seriously impact you during the course of the planets being in that position. So as an astrologer, you need to be aware that perhaps this retrograde will affect these people more and those people not at all. If you don't have a planet retrograding over a point in your chart, it's more likely to be a less intense situation for you. Of course, the retrograde will occur in some house in your chart, but if it's not directly perhaps conjoining your midheaven or conjoining your sun, it's not necessarily going to impact you as much as it will other people who will perhaps, almost dare I say, suffer under some challenging transits in the next year. So that is the days at station. That's what that means, that the planet is lingering long. The orbs I'm using for the transits will be 1 degree either side, and that's the wiggle room we've got. So let's get started. Okay, so let's get down to the retrogrades of 2020 through the planetary retrograde cycles. So first up, we want to know, well, which are the planets that are going to be retrograde in 2021, because not all planets are retrograde each year. So the Sun will not be retrograde, it never is. The Moon will not be retrograde, it never is. Mercury will actually have 3 retrograde periods. We're going to go through each one in turn. Venus will be retrograde. Mars will not be retrograde in 2021. Then Jupiter will be, Saturn. Uranus has actually, we're straddling 2 retrograde periods, one at the beginning of the year and one at the end of the year. And Neptune will be retrograde as well, and also Pluto. So we're going to be looking at several different retrograde cycles, but not all planets will be retrograde. So here we have a table of the 2021 planetary retrograde periods, and I've put each of the planets down the side there, and you can see where Mercury in green, where each of Mercury's little retrogrades will occur 3 times a year. Venus will be towards the end of the year. Mars has got nothing. Jupiter mid-year, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto. So let's have a closer look now at the Mercury retrogrades. So the first retrograde period is going to occur in the sign of Aquarius. The second retrograde for Mercury will be in the sign of Gemini, which is its own sign, a great place. And then the third retrograde period will be in the sign of Libra. So all of these are air signs. And what happens with Mercury, because it retrogrades at around 4-month intervals, it moves through the elements. So in 2021, Mercury is fully retrograde in the air element. So the air signs are all related to intellectual thinking, processing and conceptualizing, and that's where Mercury is going to retrograde this year. So Mercury's first retrograde period, here is the diagram of the actual retrograde. The planet moves in from the top right. It enters the pre-shadow on January the 16th. It will then have the station retrograde on January the 13th at 26 Aquarius and remain 3 days at the station. The red is then Mercury moving backwards to 11 degrees Aquarius, and that will then station direct on February the 21st, again 3 days at the station. Mercury will then slowly pick up speed and trot along merrily, and it will leave the after shadow on March the 13th. So that will be the first Mercury retrograde period. So this Mercury retrograde period will affect anyone who has a birthday between January the 30th and February the 16th specifically, and anyone who has planets or points in their chart between 11 to 26 Aquarius, because any of these 2 conditions and you are going to get a 3-hit transit from Mercury this year. So the second Mercury retrograde period, Mercury will enter the pre-shadow on May the 15th. It will station retrograde at 24 Gemini on May the 19th and again stay 3 days at the station, which is generally Mercury's hovering time. Mercury will then retrograde back to 19 Gemini and station direct on June the 22nd, once more 3 days at the station. Slowly move on then directly, and it will finally leave the after shadow on July the 7th. So this is Mercury's second retrograde through Gemini. And this will specifically affect anyone who has a birthday between the 6th to the 14th of June, and anyone who has planets or points between 16 to 24 degrees Gemini in their natal chart. So the third Mercury retrograde cycle for 2021, Mercury is going to be entering the pre-shadow on September the 7th. It will make a station retrograde on September the 27th at 25 Libra. It will then retrograde all the way back to 10 Libra, and that will be on October the 18th at the station direct, and it will then move off forward again and finally leave the after shadow on November the 3rd, 2021. So this is Mercury's retrograde through Libra, the other air sign. And this Mercury retrograde will affect anybody who has a birthday between the 2nd to the 20th of October, or if you have planets or points in your natal chart between 10 degrees to 25 degrees of Libra. You will be hit by a 3-hit transit from Mercury this year. Let's have a look at Venus retrograde. Venus is direct for most of the year, which bodes well for all the weddings that's going to occur in the summer. And Venus will enter the after shadow on November the 18th. Then on December the 19th, it's actually going to station retrograde at 26 Capricorn. Venus as well stays 3 days at the station. It will then retrograde back over the holiday season, Christmas and New Year, to 11 degrees Capricorn, and then on the January the 29th, 2022, it will station direct and then start moving forward again. And finally, Venus will leave the after shadow on March the 2nd, 2022. And just an aside, you really don't want to be getting married when Venus is retrograde. It's really not a good idea. So this Venus retrograde will affect anyone who has a birthday from the 1st to the 18th of January, and anyone with planets or points in their chart between 11 to 26 Capricorn. So if you have planets or points at those positions, you will receive a 3-hit transit from Venus this year. Jupiter retrograde. So Jupiter will enter the pre-shadow on April the 28th. It will move along to June the 20th at 2 degrees Pisces and station retrograde. Jupiter will then cross back into Aquarius, all the way back to 22 Aquarius for its station direct on October the 18th. And Jupiter stays 19 days at its station, so it really does hover a long time at those degrees. It will then move forward again and finally leave the after shadow on January the 9th, 2027. It will finally leave the after shadow on January the 9th, 2022. So Jupiter is straddling the sign boundary between Aquarius and Pisces for its retrograde period. There is one station in Pisces at 2 degrees Pisces, and the second station is actually back in Aquarius. So this Jupiter retrograde period will affect anyone with a birthday between the 10th to the 22nd of February, and anyone who has planets or points between 22 Aquarius to 2 degrees Pisces in your natal chart. If you meet any of these criteria, you will receive a 3-hit Jupiter transit this year. So the Saturn retrograde period, Saturn will enter the pre-shadow on February the 15th, and it will station retrograde on May the 23rd at 13 degrees Aquarius. Now Saturn will linger 26 days at this station. It will then retrograde back all the way to 6 degrees Aquarius, and on October the 11th, it will then station direct, again lingering for over 26 days at this station too. Saturn will start to move forward again and then leave the after shadow on January 16th, 2022. So Saturn will be retrograding in Aquarius as well. So this Saturn retrograde period will affect anyone with a birthday between January the 26th to February the 22nd, and anyone who has planets or points between 6 degrees to 13 degrees Aquarius. So if you meet either of these criteria, you will receive a 3 Saturn transit to your chart. So with Uranus retrograde, I'm just going to ignore the first few days in January and go to the main retrograde period, which occurs later on in the year. So Uranus will enter the pre-shadow on May the 4th. It will then station retrograde on August the 20th at 14 Taurus. Uranus remains 41 days at this station. It will then retrograde back to 10 degrees Taurus on January the 18th, 2022, once again lingering around 39 days at this station, and then move forward and finally leave the after shadow by March the 5th, 2022. And as you can see, the whole start from entering the pre-shadow to leaving the after shadow is really 10 months. And this does show that Uranus is a far longer retrograde and hovers a lot longer around certain areas of the zodiac. So this Uranus retrograde will affect anyone with a birthday between April the 30th to May the 6th, and anyone who has planets or points between 10 degrees to 14 degrees Taurus, because that is where Uranus is going to do its retrograde, and you will receive a 3-hit Uranus transit if you have planets or points on those degrees. Then we have Neptune retrograde. So Neptune will enter the pre-shadow on March the 5th. It will then station retrograde on June the 25th at 23 Pisces. Neptune remains 50 days at the station. It will then slowly creep back to 20 degrees Pisces, and on December the 1st it will station direct, once more lingering 49 days at the station, which is really a long time, and then it will move off directly and finally clear the after shadow on March the 22nd, 2022. So you can see that now as it enters the pre-shadow on March the 5th, it leaves the after shadow on March the 22nd, that it is actually almost spending the whole year around these particular degrees. And that's the nature of Neptune. It really hardly ever moves. So this Neptune retrograde period will affect anyone with a birthday between March the 10th to the 15th, because your sun will be affected by this, and anyone with planets or points in their natal chart between 20 to 23 degrees Pisces. This is where Neptune will be retrograding, and you will be receiving a 3-hit Neptune transit this year. Let's have a look at Pluto retrograde. So Pluto enters the pre-shadow on January the 5th. It will then station retrograde on April the 27th at 26:48 Capricorn and remain 53 days at this station. Pluto will then retrograde backwards to 24:18 Capricorn, which is not very far, and on October the 6th it will then station direct, and at this point it's lingering 52 days at this station. And Pluto will finally move forward and leave the after shadow on January the 28th, 2022. So we can see that the Pluto, with its position from entering the pre-shadow on January the 5th 1 year to leaving the pre-shadow on January the 28th the 2nd year, that tells you that for over the course of one whole year, Pluto will be hovering within its retrograde position. And this is why you will frequently receive a double retrograde from Pluto, from the one cycle this year, and then perhaps next year's cycle also creeps into these areas as well. So sometimes you can receive a 5-hit transit from Pluto. But for this particular retrograde cycle, it will affect anybody who has their birthday between January the 13th to the 17th, because Pluto will be conjoining their sun, and anyone who has planets or points between 24 to 26 Capricorn, as Pluto will then be making at least a 3-hit transit to those planets or points in your natal chart. So there we have it, all the retrograde cycles for 2021. As a forecasting astrologer, you're going to learn to know when they are, learn to love when they are, and if you want more information, eventually you'll be able to get my guide, which has got all the details in it as well. But in the meantime, you can start looking ahead to how these planets that will retrograde are actually going to impact yourself, your family, and your clients. So I'd love to know that if you have any of these retrograde planets that's going to conjoin your natal chart, either through planets or one of the points in your chart, we'd love to hear about it. Let us know in the comments below. I'm Alison Price. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.